Welcome to Ironworks Church. I'm Sam Andreatis, a pastor, and I'm here with two Christians who are in the same church, and they disagree about mask wearing. One is pro-mask, one is no mask. They're sitting calmly beside me, and this is Ironworks Church presentation of Iron Sharpens Iron. All right, again, welcome. Welcome. Our country is divided on the measures that we should be taking to combat the novel COVID-19 virus. There is sharp disagreement. What happens when people disagree like that? What's the result? Well, in our country, it seems, people are throwing bombs of denigration at each other from far away. And they are spending their time talking to only those people who will agree with them safely. But what happens in a Christian church? On your left, I'd like to introduce Ryan Estes. Ryan is a deacon in this church who has been a Christian for as long as he can remember. He's also a successful managing editor in marketing. And if you are in his area of software, you would know his team as an award-winning team in marketing. Now, I'd like to ask him something. Ryan, do you believe that Mary was a virgin when she bore Jesus?
I do.
And do you believe that the Gospels tell us what really happened during Jesus' life?
I do.
And do you believe eternal hell exists for those who reject the grace of God?
As sobering as it is, that's what Scripture teaches.
Thank you. Thank you for your candor. On your right, I'd like to introduce Dave Wagner. Dave is a PCA elder who is an elder in this church, but currently he's not serving on the session, not this year. But he's also a man who's been a Christian for as long as he can remember. He's a contractor who has worked on many of the buildings you will see around Phoenixville, including the beautiful one that we're sitting in right now. And I'd like to ask you some questions, Dave. Do you believe that God really spoke to Moses as a man speaks to his friend?
I do.
Do you believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God?
Yes, I do.
And do you believe that Jesus physically rose on the third day after being dead?
Absolutely.
There you have it, friends. In addition, I can tell you that I've been in both of these men's homes, and they love their wives dearly. They are each raising two children effectively in the admonition of the Lord. And they're walking the walk. So in other words, they're the real deal. What you have sitting here are two not mushy Christians, not just believers in name only, but they're the real thing. They're church officers. They're respected in their vocations. They're respected in their congregation. They're respected in their home. And they disagree. So what happens? Well, tonight they're going to talk, and we're going to listen. This is not a debate. These are not professionals. We're not going to be declaring a winner tonight. They're not experts. We're not billing them as such. And as such, though, it's almost more valuable for us to be listening to their discussion tonight because they're simply two sincere Christian believers who disagree on a very difficult topic. And they're not professional debaters, they're not commentators, they're not politicians. And they each have jobs. In other words, they're just like you and me who are trying to navigate their way through these crazy times. And just to provide some context about what we've been doing, the policy that we've had here at Ironworks Church has been following the CDC language to encourage masking indoors, especially where social distancing is difficult, while providing outdoor seating and spaces where people can be. And we've been blessed here in our space that we can do that. At the same time, noting that the Pennsylvania governor's orders and mandates have never been binding on churches, for which we are thankful, we've sought to leave the decision about mask wearing up to your individual judgment and circumstances. And we have made NK95 masks available, KN95s, for people who wanted to wear them. And what we found is that most people have come wearing their own masks, although some do not wear masks in our church. But this doesn't tell us still what actual people's positions are. If you talk to people in the church, you find that many in our congregation have very different opinions on this issue. And so we're inviting Dave and Ryan to come and have a dialogue in front of us. And they're brave men willing to put themselves out here and do that for our benefit. They don't represent any contingent or anybody really except themselves for this. But they show us two sincere believers who are willing to talk to each other about such a divisive issue as this. We're going to leave some time after they have their exchanges for your questions. So if you're here in person or if you're joining us on our live stream, you can text your questions to the number on the screen, and I'm going to see what we'll have time for. I'll be moderating here tonight. And I'm going to be asking them 3 questions. The first question is it good to wear masks to combat the COVID-19 virus? The second, what should be our response as Christians to local government measures? And third, what should be our behavior as Christians coming to our church service? Each man will have up to 5 minutes to reply to each question, and then they'll be questioned by each other with an exchange. And I'm going to be here, as I say, to moderate and move us along. So to begin, I'm going to flip a coin based on Proverbs 18:18, which I've used many times raising my children when there were many disagreements. So I'm going to flip a coin, and the coin will decide which one just goes first, depending on whose head and whose tail. Do you mind being a head? Do you feel like a head? Do you mind being a tail, Ryan? You're a noble man. Okay, heads, tails. Whoever lands is the one going first for the first question. It's a strange coin. What is that? I haven't used one of these in a long time. Coins. Oh, it's a tail. Okay. Okay, so Ryan, I'm going to set a timer up here so you can go first in your presentation.
All right, thanks, Sam. So a couple of
Let
things.
me just remind folks of the question.
Sure.
The first question is it good to wear masks to combat the COVID-19 virus?
So one thing that you should know about me, I am not a hard lockdown guy. You'll often see me walking around the neighborhood without a mask, but I do wear a mask when it seems wise, and that's really what I'm trying to be, is wise. I take this virus seriously. Johns Hopkins University data tells us that 225,000 people have died so far in the U.S. It's a big number. 9,000 of them in Pennsylvania. But let's bring it home a little bit. 23 people in our small town of Phoenixville have died as a result of this virus in our borough, our small borough. I know at least one person who has died from it, someone I was close to in the past, and maybe you know someone as well. And even for young, healthy people, sure. Maybe some people don't get severe symptoms, but a lot of others can get walloped by it. The idea behind masks being that they help to prevent transmission, slow the spread of the virus, especially with people who may be pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic. If I have it unknowingly, I don't want to give it to you unknowingly. There's data out there that suggests that masks work. There's lots of data, and it's difficult to conduct studies that measure some of this stuff, to be sure. It's hard to put a bunch of people in a room, give masks that to half of them, and then pass a jar of coronavirus around. There are some ethical issues with that. We don't want to suggest that that should happen. But it appears to me that the preponderance of evidence suggests that masks are effective. A study in the journal Nature Medicine conducted in 2013 to 2016 measured the amount of viral particles that were communicated when people were wearing surgical masks versus not. It wasn't the coronavirus, but the study found that masks significantly reduced the amount of the levels of influenza RNA in respiratory droplets and significantly reduced the levels of coronavirus RNA in aerosols. Another journal, medical journal called, and I don't know how to pronounce this, is JAMA or JAMA, Network Open. What is it, JAMA? Yeah. A study looked at Mass General Brigham, which is the largest healthcare system in Massachusetts with over 75,000 employees. And what they did was they were testing healthcare workers, and they found that on a given date, they instituted a mask policy, and they found that prior to the mask policy, which was set up on March 25th, and it wasn't mask policy, it was masks plus other mitigation measures. Prior to that, the numbers of healthcare workers who tested positive in their system was rising exponentially. And after that date, it began to decline pretty significantly. But let's look at Kansas. The University of Kansas Institute for Policy and Social Research released this study this past Sunday, October 25th. And they looked at a statewide mandate that the governor of Kansas set up on July 3rd, and basically a statewide mask mandate. 20 counties were allowed to opt out. So of the 105 counties in Kansas, 20 counties enforced this, and 85 did not. What they did was they looked at the data with about 14 days to account for when the mask mandate went into effect, and then there's a delay of about 14 days before you start to see symptoms and positive tests. Those 20 counties that had mask mandates in effect began to see their number of cases flatten and in some cases decline, while the counties with mask mandates or without the mask mandates saw the numbers rise significantly over time to the point where by September, counties with mask mandates had half the number of positive COVID tests come back per 100,000 people compared to those without.
Have a minute.
Okay. What about changing directives from the CDC or states? Does that make a difference that we heard one thing before and one thing after? I would say not. As we learn more information, it's good to modify our policies to reflect what we're learning. So maybe we're still unconvinced. Fine. Shouldn't we err on the side of caution given that lives are at stake? I hate wearing masks. They're uncomfortable. I sometimes feel foolish for wearing one. But if you're the kind of person, and if you're the kind of person who tends to think, look, we're not going to stop this thing, we might as well accept the cost. But as Christians, aren't we supposed to be pro-life in all of its forms? We care about the unborn, we care about the sick and about the elderly, we care about the disabled, and we say these people are made in the image of God. Their lives are of infinite worth. Their lives worth fighting for, and they're worth wearing a mask for in public.
Well, that was impressive. It was exactly 5 minutes.
I had to skip down a little bit.
Very good. All right, well, thank you very much, Ryan. That was well put together and clear for us. So, Dave, is it good to wear masks to combat the COVID-19 virus?
Before you start, am I supposed to look at them? Or?
You can look wherever you would like.
Okay. I can't see you guys, sorry. Thank you, Sam. And just to give you a little bit of my background, first of all, I am not an expert. Okay? I'm not a doctor. Don't try this at home. But I have had a lot of experience in the medical field. I've done about 1,500 to 2,000 autopsies when I worked for a forensic and medical examiner. And it was part of my job to read medical literature. So I'm very familiar with it. I'm not an expert, but it's very interesting to me. And I think it is really germane to the rest of this topic to look at the science. So as I was reading through all this data, and there is so much data to read through, both before and after COVID, there's a couple things that kind of came to the surface for me. And one of the things is that there are a lot of experts at the top of their field on both sides of this topic. And I know that doesn't get a lot of publicity in the press right now, that there are intelligent doctors on this side, but there are. And if you don't believe me, Google the Great Barrington Declaration. Next time when he's talking, just go ahead and Google that. Just kidding.
That just came out, right?
Recently, and there's already 40,000 doctor signatures. Well, you guys got to read it. Anyway, the other thing that was pretty evident as I was sifting through the data is that there's this massive disparity between pre-COVID data and post-COVID data. It's absolutely fascinating to me. And one of the things I think we have to be really careful of, always in science, but especially here, is confirmation bias. And I believe that, I think we all have to agree that this issue has been politicized a million ways to Sunday. And there's a massive cultural pressure exerted a certain way on this topic. And for me, it was very important to try to combat that bias. So I studied a lot of literature before. I did it after as well, but I kind of focused on before. And one study that I found particularly compelling was published in the British Medical Journal. And this is one of the world's most premier journals, one of the oldest journals. In March 2015, they were actually studying cloth masks. Now, there's obviously, I think most of you know, because of all the data out there on the news, there's a lot of difference between an N95 and what most of you are wearing today. But this was actually studying cloth masks. And I'm just going to quote it for you. Conclusions on the study. This study was the first RCT, randomized controlled trial, of cloth masks. And the results caution against use of cloth masks. This is an important finding to inform occupational health and safety. Moisture retention, reuse of cloth masks, and poor filtration may increase risk of infection. So these are scientists before COVID hit, before there's any bias. They don't have a dog in the fight. They're saying, don't use masks. I mean, we can look at the CDC's own data that was published in July, I believe, this year. And of the people in this study who contracted COVID, 70% said they were wearing their mask all the time. An additional 15% said most of the time. So there's 85% of the people off the top who are saying they're wearing masks. And I don't think there was any conclusions being drawn from that data, but I think, if they're so darn effective. So my issue with masks from a scientific standpoint is that they don't work. They're not designed to filter out a virus. A virus is so incredibly small. Just if we could blow it up and the virus would be represented by a period on this page, it would be about the size, the holes in your mask would be about the size of this paper. So masks, at least cloth masks, cannot stop viruses.
I have about a minute.
Thank you. And I believe that the negative side effects with the public not being trained how to use cloth masks, or any kind of masks for that matter, not knowing how to dispose of them properly or clean them, it actually results in more infections. From an educational standpoint, where we know that kids need that for developmental purposes, they need facial expressions. And also socially, I mean, we have turned into a society of people who turn in their neighbors because they're not becoming good citizens. I just don't believe, for me personally, and looking at the experts, I don't believe that scientists have proven that masks are effective to combat viruses.
Very good. Okay. All right, so there you have two different opinions. Obviously, these guys disagree. And I want to give an opportunity now for there to be an exchange if they would like. Let me kind of go back and forth here. So I'll start with you, Ryan. Do you have any kind of questions that you would ask Dave?
I do, and let me also say I agree with you that when we say that we have become a society that where we turn in our neighbors, boy, that breaks my heart. I hate how this has become a divisive issue, and I hope that this evening is one that can really help combat that. It's hard to know what question to think about. I'll just go with a real simple one. You know, you mentioned the size of viruses compared to the size of the fabric, you know, the openings in the fabric of a mask. My understanding, and I invite correction here, is that, well, first the fact that we're not trying to filter out from internal, we're trying to filter out from external. And so can you speak at all to studies that we've seen where they're using, cameras and lasers to show, hey, here's how particles expelled masks can help keep them from spreading farther to infect people? And then can you also speak to, my understanding is that it's not like an individual virus floating in the air by itself is floating out there, but so much as it is viruses in aerosols or respiratory droplets, which of course are bigger than that.
So the first question being...
I got a double.
Yeah, you did get a double. Just sum it up for me.
What was the first question?
Yeah, the idea that viruses are put out there not floating by themselves, but they're on aerosols or respiratory droplets.
Right.
And then and the idea that masks are not intended to protect the wearer, but to protect others around the wearer. And I've seen examples where they can show someone wearing a mask and how it prevents the respiratory droplets from drifting.
The experiments, right? Yeah. Right. So if I can just, I actually worked at in the biology department at Clemson, and we did all kinds of experiments, not necessarily on masks, but I think it's really important to distinguish between an experiment done on Good Morning America and real world data. So it's one thing just to, and this was a legitimate, because I read studies on both sides, some in support of masks and some against, and one of the studies, at least that I saw, was these participants in a clean room environment, coughing into a mask, into a petri dish, and then they're collecting the particles and seeing how many are in and out, and also measuring the volume. That is a far cry different from what we're experiencing today. The real world has nothing to do, the similarities are like stop right there. You take off your mask, you take a drink of coffee, you reuse your mask. Where does your mask go when you're not using it? It goes in your pocket, it goes in your purse, it drops on the floor. It is when we are in a lab and we're using a mask, we take off that mask and put it in a hazmat bag, and that gets discarded right away, incinerated. That is not what's happening in the public. So doing something in a lab, a clean room environment, is far different than what's happening in the real world. And I think that's why the real world data doesn't back up a lot of these experiments that we're seeing. And then to speak about the particles, yes, you're right. Initially, there are spit particles that come out that the masks can catch. The problem is when the spit evaporates, it takes about a second or two. The virus is still there. So there's nothing gluing that virus to your mask. And now that virus is free to now enter the environment. So not having a proper mask like an N95 or something like that that's actually positively charged to collect and hold viruses is going to be ineffective at best, in my humble, non-expert opinion.
Well said.
All right. In listening to Ryan talk about the reasons he advocates masks, do you have any questions that came up for you about it?
Yeah, so I guess just overall with the way you presented, you started off a lot like our news presentations start with total number of cases and how many deaths and everything. What I'm saying tonight does not make light of death, or I'm not saying it doesn't matter. Every life is precious and it does matter. And as we speak tonight, there's an old friend of our family, a mentor that I had, that's probably going to pass away this week because of COVID. So I don't make light of this at all. But at the same time, I think a lot of that data it's easy to cause panic when you inject that type of data into untrained people in the society. So I guess my question to you is, do you feel like the news and even unintentionally, maybe even tonight, by injecting just random data without context can actually be harmful to people?
Do I think the news can be harmful to people? Yeah, I certainly do that. And I recognize that there is a huge number of news outlets out there. Like certainly where we choose to get our information matters. How that information is presented matters. That said, and so it sounds to me like your question is less about, those specific numbers and more about how we're actually talking about them. So yes, of course, depending on, if you're reading, if you're watching CNN or Fox News, you're going to get two very different stories, most likely. You're going to get two completely different spins, and I don't think that it is possible necessarily to spin or to have a completely spin-free story. That said, I don't have a reason to disbelieve the numbers. Some people, I hear, oh, you can't trust any of those numbers you hear, and that may be true, but I don't have a reason to disbelieve it. And in a world where we are all under just bombarded by information, we have to make choices and try to be wise. And so I look at those numbers and I think that they're right. I don't harbor any kind of conspiracy theories about them. And I think that when I look at those numbers and I think, these are excess deaths that most likely would not have happened otherwise, or at least a huge percentage of them would not have happened otherwise. I think that that's something that we do need to at least keep in mind as we're talking about this issue, that this is not abstract, that this is not just theoretical, but that as you know from this friend of your family's, that this is impacting lives. And I just think that bringing some gravity to it is important.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, gentlemen, any other exchanges for one another on this? No?
We got a second question? You didn't tell me that.
This, thank you guys. This was round one on mask wearing. If you have questions about this particular question, I encourage you to text it into the number on your screen. And stay tuned as we continue with Iron Sharpens Iron. All right, welcome back to Ironworks Church's presentation of Iron Sharpens Iron. And I just want to mention on that last round, let me just ask you, Dave, because Ryan cited a few studies in specific, but you chose not to in your presentation. But would you have 2 or 3 specific studies that were particularly compelling for you that you would have available for people if they wanted to text you?
I have pages and pages and pages of studies that are very compelling.
Okay.
5 minutes didn't give me a lot of time to present them all.
No, it's not. But 2 or 3 if people wanted to know?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if you do, contact him about that. All right, now we get to question number 2, which is what should be our response as Christians to the local government measures. Again, we're going to have a 5-minute presentation, first this time from Dave. Dave?
So I think as Christians, when we're discussing any kind of governmental policy, I think there's two really important scriptural principles that come to bear. And the first one is I believe we are called to stay back corruption. Right? Matthew 5 talks about we're salt and light in the earth. So we're staying back corruption. And then secondly, I believe we're called to defend those who are unable to defend themselves. We are called to protect the poor, to protect the widow and the orphan. And we find that in James 1 and Deuteronomy 15 and on through the Bible. So I believe that when in speaking context of the government, we're called to stand for justice and truth. Now, I want to make sure that you're not going to mistake me for the guy on the videos, right, that are punching the Walmart employee in the face because he's not wearing a mask. That's not me. It couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, masks have very little to do with this issue for me. And I believe that no matter how small or big that you believe the threat of COVID is, we are experiencing a profound loss of our liberties when the government can come in and tell us what we have to wear or not have to wear, what we can, if we can go to church, if we can even go to work to provide for our families. I believe that is wrong. It's against the law, it's against nature, and it's wrong. The thing is about governments, as soon as you relinquish control of any freedom, you never get the chance to redo that. You never get it back. And you are always reliant on the people in charge to be benevolent. But the problem is power corrupts. And the more power you have, the more it corrupts. And we're already seeing this with multiple government officials, governors, mayors, and whatnot, all over the United States who have taken a massive amount of authority, and they have exercised that to harm Christians. We see it in New York City with the Hasidic Jews. We see it in California, in Kentucky, and most notably in Nevada, where they give preference to casinos over churches. This went to the Supreme Court. And I believe that it is absolutely naive to think that religious persecution can't come back to America. Because I believe we're seeing it right now. This is the beginning of it. And I think that the culture has moved beyond just an indifference to Christians to hostility. And we are losing our ability to stand for truth and justice very, very quickly. And I just don't believe it is true or just that people are labeled non-essential and not allowed to provide for their families. And then yet, at the same time, abortion clinics are considered essential and allowed to continue. I don't think it's true or just that the media is peddling fear and selling panic, and it is causing death and destruction. Literally, suicide rates are through the roof because of this. So I guess where I'm at with it is how long are we going to hold our culture hostage to fear? It's so ironic, right? Because I feel that those of us who are actually fighting for liberties, for your liberty and my liberty, are being called selfish by the media. And instead, this lockdown culture is condemning countless families to generations of poverty and even crime. And I believe that's wrong. And I believe that the long-term results of this are actually going to cause more death than what has scientifically been proven by epidemiologists, that herd immunity can actually cause less death in the long run.
All right, thank you, Dave. And so your comments were including mask wearing as part of that, I guess, right? Because you went a little more broad with that.
Yes, again, I feel like mask wearing is one small, very, very small part of this whole issue. And I think a lot of times people who are in my camp, if you will, I don't want to make it an us versus you, but a lot of times we get lumped in with those obnoxious people, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. I just believe that at some point we have to take a stand, and for me, it's here.
Okay, thank you. Well, Ryan, let me turn it over to you now. What should be our response as Christians to the local government measures?
So, Dave, I expect that you and I are actually in greater agreement here than we were on the previous question. I'm going to limit my comments really specifically to apply to the mask mandate. I'm not trying to address the lockdown or school or business closures. And I also want to be clear. Yeah, masks have gotten political, and that blows my mind. It's so important whether we wear a mask or not that our reasoning is not to align with a particular party or not. So for me, wearing a mask is not virtue signaling in one way or another. That's not at all why I'm wearing a mask. But let me focus on not even national rules, but what we face here in Pennsylvania when it comes to masks. We're required to wear them outdoors when we can't be far apart from other people. I'm trying to avoid using the word social distancing. I'm tired of it. When we're in businesses or other public indoor spaces, on public transportation, when preparing food, things like that. And there are exceptions, right? Whether you're a young kid, whether you're someone with an underlying or with a pre-existing condition. Thankfully, Governor Wolf, even though I know that many people, including myself, disagree with him on many things, has not tried to limit how we gather for worship and what we do in this building. And for that, I think we can be grateful. Again, I'm not a hard lockdown guy. I'm not legalistic about this. In our homes, for example, as we try to show hospitality to people, I think we need to balance how we manage risk with how we care for others and with cultivating community. And as I think about this question, my answer has a lot to do with our posture toward the government, and I believe we need to try to live wisely. So what should we do when we're out in public right now with this issue? And I want to look at Scripture, the book that governs our lives. In this, Paul is writing to the Romans in chapter 13, and he says this: "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. There is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. And therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who's in authority? Then do what is good, and you'll receive his approval." And the passage goes on a little down lower. He said, "Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience." And you think, man, this must have been written when there was a very godly governor, a wise and virtuous man. And not hardly. This was written to people in Rome during the time of the Roman Emperor Nero, who was not really a paragon of virtue. He was a murderer. He killed Christians. According to the historian Tacitus, he had Christians burned alive. This is the environment in which Paul said, honor the emperor. Our own church's confession, the Westminster Confession of Faith, says it's the duty of people to pray for their magistrates, to honor their persons, to pay them tribute or other dues, to obey their lawful commands, and to be subject to their authority for conscience sake. And by that, I take it to mean to obey commands that don't go against the law of God, that don't ask me to sin, that don't ask me to avoid doing what God has asked me to do. Now, Christians are no strangers to civil disobedience. There are times when it is called for, when there's real injustice, or when the government tells people to violate God's law. We see this in Acts 4, when Peter and John were preaching about Jesus. The authorities didn't like it. And Acts 4 says, "So they called them and charged them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered them, 'Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge, for we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard.'" Now, I don't believe that being asked to wear masks in public rises to the level of violating God's law. The day may come when we do genuinely face an unjust law where we must say respectfully, I cannot do that. But I think that that's the hill to die on and not this one, even though I do take your points, Dave. Even if we disagree with Governor Wolf and believe that the mask mandate is an overreach, we have a government that allows us to make the case for change, to request change, to vote for change, to work for change. So how do we look and act like Christ? Is it not beautiful when people bear up under laws or circumstances they don't like while working for change because we are trying to honor the Lord in what we do?
Yeah, I was just reminding
Can
you.
we just let the 34 seconds tick down in silence while we ponder that? No.
Okay. So good points made there by both of you, but let me ask you, Dave, if you have anything to kind of respond to Ryan in that.
So just hearing what you had to say, and even I feel like there is some agreement in how we feel about the government saying things, but maybe what I kind of perceived, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is we would draw the line at a different place of when we think it's important enough to practice civil disobedience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly we draw the line at a different place. And I think that everything that I just said, you agree with. I guess if I can ask a question, I would ask you to respond to what I said. And how would you respond to what I said about, how would you respond to people being commanded to obey, to honor the emperor, to obey the law, unless it's an unjust or unless it is a law that violates God's law?
So I absolutely agree with that. And what I'm suggesting isn't anarchy. But I think that if we wait until we are saying, I'm not going to take it anymore because we can't X, Y, Z, when it's an actual, if the governor says you can't preach, we've waited too long. And what I'm saying is, like, that's your hill to die on when the governor or whoever says
You can't worship.
You can't worship, you can't preach, you can't do all these things. I believe it is my personal conviction that we've waited too long. So I guess what I'm asking you is at what point would you feel that you have a responsibility to uphold the cause and defend those people who are getting trampled down?
I mean, that's a great question. I think I need to think on that a little bit. I think that there's certainly a time and a place for that. And I think that because everything is so complex that we have to weigh these things. If the government says, at what point does it get a little bit gray and blurry, and we need to use wisdom to make these, and that is why I do believe we have consciences, whereas one person might say, you know what, I just don't feel right ignoring this request from the government right now, and another person says, I don't feel right not. Right. I think that one of us is wrong there. I don't think that God's law sort of bounces up and down from person to person, but we are fallen people. We live in a fallen world, and I think that we're, I trust that as you and I talk about these things, that we're both trying to approach it from a thoughtful, scripturally informed, prayerful way. And if this were a real debate, I'd try to nail them to the wall, but that's not my job here. I think we're probably in some agreement.
So Ryan, would you? It seems like Dave's, if I understand his point, is saying that there are times when some preventative line drawing is needed, so that to enact what the scriptures that you brought up, we obey until the government asks us to do something that is morally wrong. Is there room for kind of anticipating that and taking measures to draw the line before the line actually comes? What would you say?
I mean, in my political science class in college, this is the kind of question we wrestled with, and I always felt really good about my answer until the professor said, yeah, but what about this? Yeah. And I'll admit, these are really thorny questions. I'm grateful that I didn't live during the time of the Revolutionary War, where I know some people went to Canada because they didn't feel right rebelling against the crown. And other people said, we have to do this. And I'm grateful to live in America. But these are hard issues. Yeah. And I don't think that I can give you a straight answer like this, not a straight answer, give you an answer this quickly without serious thought and prayer on that one.
Fair enough. Thank you. Well, let me ask you, Dave, how would you distinguish your position from a position that is just sort of being patriotic? In other words, you're saying, I want to preserve what we have in this country. I don't think you're saying that, but how would you distinguish your position from somebody who says we need to stand up for our rights because we're Americans?
I think that, well, that's a fine line to draw, I think, because a lot of the rights that we have were drawn up to protect people fleeing from governments that were hindering their worship. So that's a very fine line, but for me, this particular issue has, like Ryan said, I'm thankful that in Pennsylvania, we've been exempt from all of these laws. Yes. But it is not a stretch, because we have already seen a massive increase in the power that has been usurped, what I believe has been usurped by different governors. And
So let's just tell our viewers, Pennsylvania, a nice place to live. But please.
Where was I? Where these governors have usurped it and used it against Christians. So for me, that was the line that I, in my own heart, had to draw and say, you know what, enough is enough. We have to take a stand. We have to push back. We have to look at the science. We have to look at the science and push back against what I believe is a lot of disinformation in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Well, this has been very helpful, guys. I find it very helpful, is listening to you and hearing where your hearts are and where your thoughts are. Very, very much gives us things to think about and understanding one another. Well, that is the conclusion of round 2 here in Iron Sharpens Iron. We're going to take a short intermission now, a few minutes. We have refreshments for those of you who have joined us live here. You can go into the back and enjoy those refreshments. If you're joining us online, we'll be back in, I'd say, about 12 minutes. And thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon. Hey, well, welcome back to Ironworks Church presentation of Iron Sharpens Iron. Thank you for joining us, whether you're joining us in person or whether you're joining us over live stream. We're coming up to our third round, our third question, which might be the most important to many of us. But before we do that, this is an issue, of course, of COVID-19 and its effects on us. And one of the great things that we have going on here at Ironworks Church is an outreach called the Phoenixville Outreach, which has managed to get in touch with some of the most disadvantaged in our community and has been ministering to them. But the situation has really been exaggerated by COVID-19. So I thought it would be a good time just to introduce those of you who are not familiar with this ministry and those of you who are saying, I want to do something. Like, we're dealing in one way with it now with our discussion, but you want to do something about it. You should listen to the man I'm about to bring up. And his name is Patrick Gallagher, and he is going to share with us on Phoenixville Outreach. Patrick?
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the intro. My name's Patrick, and I'm happy to be here and to talk about something that has practical significance. I think that's really important. Like Sam said, there's something else that really has practical significance that many of you are already involved with, and that is around the need for service within the Phoenixville community. So because of coronavirus, the need out there that we've seen over the past few months has it's become greater and greater with every week. The need for housing, the need for jobs, for sustainable living, for food, and the list goes on. So it's really been a blessing as we've built more and more relationships within the community, and I don't see the need going away or diminishing. So we're looking for additional support. We're looking for more people that feel this call to service, who are saying, you know what, I'm actually doing pretty well. I know that there are people out there that are struggling. Is there something that I can be doing in terms of my time, my talent, my treasure? There is something that you can be doing. So if that speaks to you, we have some really tangible needs and ways that you could get involved. There's needs for physical donations. There's needs for your time. If you can drive, if you can give up some of your time, maybe you're a little bit handier and you can use some of your skills that you have. There's needs for jobs, there's needs for housing, and most of all, there's needs for prayer, too. So we're looking for a team that will dedicate themselves to pray for the people of Phoenixville that are really on the economic fringes, and that would be great if we could get a team assembled that would do that on a frequent basis. So if any of these speak to you, please, if you would, I think the contact information is coming out on the screen. You can text or you can email myself or my wife, Lyndon, at the email address that you see on the screen. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much, Patrick. All right. Just taking a look. There are some really significant questions that people are texting in. We'll have to see how many of those we can navigate through. But before that, an important question. And that's the third question of our evening, which is, what should be our behavior as Christians coming to our church service in light of these things? And we're going to go back to you, Ryan, and you're going to take the floor first.
All right, thanks, Sam. So I don't know how many minds were really changed tonight by the razor-sharp debate that you and I just had, Dave.
Not a debate.
That's dialogue. But really what tonight is about is this: how do we live together as brothers and sisters when we disagree? Now, it's important that people know, Dave, that you're my brother and I value you, regardless of how our opinions on masks differ. We've been praying for each other this week. I got a text from Dave this morning. Hey, brother, I want you to know I'm praying for you, and it meant a lot. Most people at our church on Sunday mornings do wear masks. I really respect and understand the position that Ironworks has taken. I appreciate what the pastors and staff and leadership have done to try to make people comfortable here. So what do we do on Sunday mornings? What should we do? I would like to look at Matthew 22. An expert in the law, and this is going to be familiar to many of you, an expert in the law approached Jesus and said, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So the question is, and I ask this to myself and to those who agree with me on masks as well, what most honors Jesus? How do we love each other well, even and especially when someone is on the other side of this issue? And what does it look like to do this at Ironworks? Now, numerous people that you and I both know and love have not been back to church yet, or come rarely, or have started coming and stopped coming because not everyone wears masks when they're inside, and these people feel deeply uncomfortable and concerned either for their own safety or for the safety of family members they have contact with who are older or who have underlying conditions or both. And these people are desperate for this community. And I would love to see them back at church. They want to be back at church. They want to take the Lord's Supper. And they find Sunday mornings to be hard, especially if they're alone. It was easier earlier in the pandemic when everyone was watching on the live stream because there was a sense of we're all in this together. And now, watching the live stream, you see people on the screen and you see them there and you're not. And you see them walk up to take communion, and there's a real sense of loss there. So I'm eager to see these people back at church. And if everyone wore masks on Sunday morning while they were inside, it would be so helpful. We're a family. We literally call each other brother and sister. And thinking about family, I would say if you were going to visit a grandparent each week, and that grandparent said, I'd really feel more comfortable if you wore a mask when you're here, wouldn't you do it out of love and respect for them? Since its earliest days, the church has been about relinquishing our own preferences in order to love others. In 1 Corinthians 8, for example, back then, there was meat that was sold in the markets, and oftentimes that meat may have been used sacrificially. And some Christians were afraid that if they unknowingly bought and ate that meat that had been used in a sacrifice, that it would be a sin. And Paul said, look, that's not a sin, but if it nudges you towards sin, or makes you, if you think it might be, because you see me eating that meat, then you know what? I will give up meat. He says, I will never eat meat again because I love you more than I love my right to eat meat. Now, this isn't the same scenario, but I think that there are parallels. Is worshiping indoors without a mask a preference that we need to give up in order to love our brothers and sisters well? And I want to end here with Jesus' classic prayer to the church, a prayer to the Father for the church in John 17. I have given them the glory, he says, that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. So how can we love and serve each other? How can we put others first? And this is something, Dave, that we both need to think about. I think it begins by each of us deciding to put our brothers and sisters over our own preferences. And that's hard to do. And figuring out what that looks like is hard to do. But it's what Jesus did for us. He bore with the weak. He showed compassion. He did what was not just uncomfortable, but what was excruciating because he loved us.
Very good. Thank you, brother. All right. Dave, be sure I ask it the same way. What should our behavior be as Christians coming to our church service?
So I think the short answer to that is that we come to worship, to give glory to God, to magnify him, to make him big. Right? I was reading somewhere, it said, God is the most important audience at every service. And that's why we come. And hindrances to worship need to be removed. And I think we agree on that. COVID and the related fallout has caused the most profound disunity and disagreement that I've ever seen in the church in my entire lifetime, and probably pretty much everyone's here. It is unreal the amount of damage that it has caused. And there are people, I believe, on both sides of this issue who have drawn a line in the sand, and it's unmoving, it's permanent, and they said, we're not coming back We're going to go on strike until somebody else moves. And I have struggled long and hard over this issue. It was not an easy one to come to. I know there's my brothers and sisters in this congregation that refuse to come back until everyone is masked. But the kicker is I've talked to so many other people as well who are so opposed to compulsory masking that they also won't come back if they're required to. They also won't come back even if the majority of people here are. Because for some people, I know this is hard to understand, for some people, just seeing people in masks is offensive because of what they see it represents. So I understand where you're coming from, the weaker brother issue and all that, but for me, it's which weaker brother are we talking about? It's not a black and white issue. 2020 has been a year characterized by fear. There's been fear of the virus, fear of losing our jobs, fear of authority, right, of the government. There has been fear in every aspect of this year. And I'm not saying the way that I'm doing this is perfect, but for me, it was very important to take a stand against fear. This is an issue of conscience for me. For one thing, to be able to reach out to my brothers in Christ. We're never, ever, ever going to get 100% masking. Even if we require, I know of other churches who require, and they still have people coming without masking. We're never going to. So what I'm asking, and I'm appealing to both sides, is how can we come together? This is not what we're about. Masking or not masking, whatever, it's not what we're about. So how can we come together and move on to live together in the community that God has designed for us, and stop wasting our lives? And I'm not making light of fear. I understand fear. I'm not particularly afraid of the virus as much as some people are, but because of my last job where I had to do autopsies, I did many autopsies on children, and every time I go to wake up my kids, I still have that fear that they're not going to wake up. And it doesn't matter how many studies you show me, how random and how absurd that would be, it doesn't matter because it's fear. And I say this to those people who feel fearful, that I am not judging you, I'm not upset with you or anything, and I feel fear with you. But I think it's something that we need to fight against.
Dave, thank you. Can you clarify what you were saying there before? Because this issue of the weaker brother, which you both made reference to, and you both seem concerned about different folks that you're thinking of. And Ryan, you were mentioning people who are looking at the church and saying, well, some people are masking, but some are not, and I can't go back to church unless they're all masking. And you were saying that there are people that you're familiar with and know of and talk to, and they say, I'm not going to go back to church if people are masked. Could you explain that a little more? Like why? What's going on in their head?
I believe that there are some people I've talked to who are afraid that they'll be asked to wear a mask, and they believe that it's wrong. It's an issue of conscience for them, for some of the reasons I mentioned last time. And they, again, find it offensive that that people are kowtowing to this, and they don't feel like they can. I'm not saying I agree with it necessarily, but I'm saying it's a reality in churches. And to just say we're going to become a massacre church or an anti-massacre church is not going to be beneficial for anyone. Ironworks was founded with the principles of not becoming legalistic, not catering to one interest group. And I believe that we have to hold our ground on that, because if we become legalistic in this, I think that is a slippery slope, a dangerous path.
All right. Well, I appreciate you both speaking with great passion, and I think that we're feeling each of your hearts here in this matter. Let me open it to you to ask if you would have a follow-up for one another on this.
Boy, this is a hard issue, right? Like this is hard. How do we love everybody? And I'll admit, I don't fully understand that side. I don't. But I recognize there are brothers and sisters I love who may be in that place. I guess what I want to do is not so much question, so much as push back a little bit. And certainly I'm sure that there is fear out there. But trying to be wise and prudent with what we do, I don't think fits that biblical, definition of fear. Proverbs says the wise man sees danger and takes refuge. So maybe I would just challenge you on that one, Dave, to not, just to make sure that you're not assuming that it's an unrealistic fear that people have there.
No, and I understand the distinction of what you're saying, and I'm not saying that any fear of COVID is unrealistic at all. That's not what I'm saying. But I think what we can observe is that there are certain people who it is controlling. I think you would agree with that to some level.
It sounds like the people that you're concerned with have a real fear for their health and the health of others.
A concern for their health is how I might put it in the context of this. But
it sounds like it's not fear for the people that you're concerned with. The people that you're concerned with, it's more offense at having a rule inflicted on them.
I think it very much is fear for a lot of people on this side. It's fear of what they're seeing happening in our culture. Our culture is literally going down the tubes, and they are seeing this happening. And they see masking as a symbol of one more step toward that. I'm not saying it's... And
that's a fear that the church is succumbing to,
right,
where the culture is going.
Right. But additionally, maybe I could push back just a little bit on that. Do these people go out to restaurants? And if they do, it's the same environment. I think that Ironworks' policy, providing N90, KN95, whatever it is, the one mask that actually is intended to protect the wearer for anyone who is concerned about getting it or passing it on, should be a reasonable compromise. But I guess like the one question that I have thought of that I really want to ask you, and I feel that it's really important to this discussion, is how can I compromise? Because there has to be movement somewhere.
it's funny because I was about to ask you the same thing, and I appreciate it. I welcome the question, and there aren't easy answers there, but my question to you was going to be, for those folks who say, I cannot come back if other people are wearing masks, what movement might you like to see? What movement should we see in a situation like that? And I do want to ask that to you. How might I compromise?
No, how might I,
Oh, I see. You're asking that of
compromise?
yourself.
How can I? So it's my conviction. I've laid out tonight that it's my conviction. And there's a serious reason. I'm not just sticking it to the man. There's a reason why, and I've thought it out. I feel like it's based in science. You can disagree. There's plenty of experts that do disagree. There's plenty that do agree. From the governmental side and even from a weaker brother side, these are the reasons why I do it, and also to take a stand against fear. But having said all that, I know that I need to move towards you. So how can I do that without violating my conscience? And I feel like there could be something that we do. Maybe it's hey Dave, you know what? Wear a mask when you go up to communion. I would do that for you. Yeah. I don't feel like I could do it all the time because I feel like it would alienate too many of the other people. But I'm willing to move, and I'm just asking, what more can we do to accommodate? If it's, if you're not gonna have a mask on and you have to be 75 feet away, I don't think that's reasonable. But what can we do? What can we do to get past this and move on to the real work of the church?
And I'm struck, and I appreciate what you just said. and that you would be even suggested and would be willing to do something like that. My guess is it's not going to satisfy everybody out there, just like no single sentence said tonight is going to satisfy everybody out there.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. I think that's an awesome thing. And I think that as an officer of the church on either side, I think that we're charged, one of the things that we need to do is lead in coming together.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. We have one more section that we're going to do as part of our evening, and that is your questions. And we've got a number of questions here, some of them difficult, I think. So you guys take a drink of water and get ready when we come back for the final segment of Iron Sharpens Iron. Okay. All right. So be patient with me now. I've got to try to navigate some of the different concerns and questions that are coming in. Some very thoughtful ones. But we had a question right from the floor here, so we'll start out with that one, and I'll let each of you give your response to that. One of our audience wants to know, do you think that all of this about the variety of the government measures and the mask wearing, is it really about hurting President Trump's chances of re-election? Okay. Let me...
Go for it.
Let me try to take a stab at that. This is still going out online, isn't it?
What's that?
This is still going out online, isn't it?
Online?
Online, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So watch your words. We can black out your name, though, so nobody...
Who am I to judge anyone's motives? I don't know why people are doing what they're doing. I know that there are Democratic governors and lawmakers in favor of the lockdowns and in favor of masks. I know there are also some Republican lawmakers and governors who are doing the same thing. So right there, I would not say this is just, to my view, it does not look like just a Democratic strategy. I have not heard ever any convincing evidence that this isn't real, that the disease isn't real. And if any one of us were in government, I'd like to think that we would be trying to think through ways to protect people. Whether or not you agree with what the government has done, I think that it would follow in line with Scripture to give people, to think the best of people. I think that that's what we're called to do unless we're presented with evidence to the contrary. So no, I do not think that this is all just a power play. It is possible that for some people it is. It is possible that for some people that they may take delight in seeing, in trying to hurt President Trump. But that is not where I see this. Ultimately, what I see is driving this.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. All right, so there you have it.
Dave gets the next tough one.
Okay, gentlemen, how about this question? What about not wearing a mask hurting Christian witness? If you don't wear a mask, given what people believe, do people come to think that Christians are selfish and don't care about those at risk and the immunocompromised? What would you say about that, looking at it from that dimension? Dave?
I think that's a tough one, and that's one I struggle with more. I feel like in the church environment, it's kind of different from the outside of the church environment. Like we were talking before, when an individual business owner says something, you can choose to shop there or not, but you are to abide by their rules. When it's part of a government or a church that we are a member of, I think it's a different situation. It is very concerning because, like I said earlier, we are automatically labeled as selfish without any other question whatsoever. There's a lot of judging going on, and I think there could be some very limited opportunities to be able to give a reason, though, for why we don't. That is a common theme of Scripture, to be able to answer for something. Yeah, that's a hard question. And I see because most people you pass on the street, you're not going to be able to tell them, well, I don't believe the science is blah, 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 and the reasons I'm doing this and all that. You're not going to be able to get that chance to do that. You're simply labeled whatever the zeitgeist of the culture has labeled you.
Okay, Ryan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think so, and I really appreciate Dave's answer there. I would also add to that, while I tend to agree with the question and the thinking behind the question, I would also add that Christianity holds a great number of unpopular opinions today that we don't shy away from. And so while I think that there is a great argument to be said for, hey, if you can bend on something for the sake of the gospel, as Paul said, I will become all things to all men so that some might be saved. That's a really powerful argument for this that I think really merits a lot of consideration. At the same time, just because something is difficult for the culture does not mean we don't water down the gospel for the culture, so it's not like if something's unpopular, therefore you can't do it for the sake of the gospel. But I do think I would lean on what Paul said there about how he just bent over backwards to make sure that people saw and heard what he was saying in the best light.
Very insightful answer. Thank you. Okay. If COVID was a problem in Bible times and they had the same government measures as we do, would Jesus and his disciples have worn a mask in their ministry for the gospel?
I don't know.
Smart man.
Pass.
Smart man. Well, it is a difficult, it's worth considering, but it's a difficult question if it was asked in seriousness because the context is so very different.
So
And
Matthew the tax collector might have worn it, but Simon the zealot might not have.
that's right. And Jesus would have had a dialogue
a zealot.
with, like this one. He would have invited his apostles in and said, all right, guys, sit down. We're going to talk about this. Okay. Okay, no, I'm not going to ask that. So we got some
Can you ask
great...
us later so we know what it is?
Yeah, so here there are some questions that are specifically for one or the other. So here's the question for Ryan, and that goes back to your first points about the Kansas study. Okay, so here's the question, just to let you kind of reiterate or fill that in. A pandemic naturally goes through a spike and then numbers eventually decrease. How do we know whether or not that was happening in Kansas? Our governor has increased mask mandates in our state and our numbers have only spiked. How does this show that masks work? If almost everyone wears a mask, if masks work, why the rise in cases?
So I can, thinking about the Kansas case, first of all, data in this time has got to be a nightmare. We're all trying to make decisions really quickly with whatever data we can get, and it's not like I said, you can generally just decide to infect half a room full of people and see what works and what doesn't. So oftentimes I think people are trying to work with opportunities as they present themselves. I have the link to the study. It was compelling to me. Is it something that I would want to base a national policy off of by itself? Probably not. But if you think about the state of Kansas, and it's almost like a grid. Some of the counties are misshapen, but it's all over the place throughout the state. It was this county, this county, this county, this county, this county, this county, and so on and so forth, enforced a mask mandate. And the rest of them, many of them all around those, did not. And they looked at the data from those counties. I would look at that and then saw not just a spike and then a flattening out for the counties that had the mask mandate. The ones that did not have the mask mandate, over the same period of time, the numbers just went up, 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 up in a fairly dramatic fashion. That is what I would call compelling evidence. That is not what I would call compelling proof.
Okay, thank you. Good. All right, a question for Dave. Dave, would you still attend Ironworks Church if they required masks?
I knew that one was coming. That's a really, really hard question, and I would have to. I don't know. For me, I think it would be a fundamental change in how we started, who we are, and how we started the church, and what our governing principles were. And that was to be able to accept both Republicans and Democrats, left, right, all of this. That was the goal of Ironworks, to be able to have a place in a community where, Phoenixville obviously being more of a progressive town, and being able to minister to the community and not be feeling judged because you don't have a Trump sticker on your back windshield, okay, or whatever. The fact of the matter is the body of Christ is made up of multiple different peoples over multiple different regions, and to not have to be all one, I think, would be a violation of who we are. That's not an answer. It's just I think I would have to give it a lot of thought.
Okay, good. And how would you answer this? If cloth masks are ineffective, would it not be wise to wear N95 masks to protect ourselves and others?
Absolutely. The only problem is you can't get them.
Yeah, you can get KN95s, but
And even those are, I mean, to properly wear a mask, even an N95, there was a study they did between regular medical masks and N95s. And even though we know that N95s do better with filtering viruses and whatnot out because of the positive charge, they actually found it was very similar in the results because people were taking them off. So again, it's not if you're wearing a mask, it's how well you're wearing a mask. And if you don't wear it well, it's pointless.
Okay. And how would you both respond to this comment? I wear a mask not out of fear, but out of compassion. If my hundreds of days of wearing a mask saves someone from contracting COVID, it was worth it. If I wear a mask in a grocery store, I'm going to wear it inside at church. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that resonates with where I'm at. I as I said before a couple times, I'm not a hard lockdown guy, and there are times when I think that we balance and manage risk according to how we live. However, when I'm in public, I do find that it's that question. It's not fear that drives me to put it on at church. It's not fear that drives me to put it on at the grocery store. It certainly is thinking through. It's not even necessarily the people immediately around me, although that's part of it. It's also trying to think through those folks who have said, I'm fearful when I'm around people who aren't, and trying to keep them in mind. Granted, I do know who more of those people are than the folks who say, I'm fearful when I see people wearing masks.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I just would, I guess, go back to that automatically assumes that you believe masks are effective. And, I'm not saying you can't believe that. But would it really be loving of me if I don't believe, if I'm not convinced that the data shows that, and there are studies that would actually show it's harmful, would it really be loving of me to wear a mask to salve someone, someone else's fears or whatever, I guess it would be fears in that case. Would that really be loving?
Okay. Well, I think, let me see if I can ask this question. You might think of responding to this. In terms of the government overstretching its power and not relinquishing it, during the Spanish flu, schools and churches were closed, and further on the government already had authorized the Espionage and Sedition Act. By the 1920s, the government did relinquish its power and return to normalcy. Given this fact, is it wise to take a slippery slope argument in assuming that today's government will continue to overstretch its power in the near future? And that this is added. I understand and appreciate the need for civil disobedience when the need is required. Look at Martin Luther King in the 1960s. However, in the 1940s, during World War II, we had a nationwide rationing to fight the Axis powers. Was that government overreach? If not, why is a once-in-a-century pandemic not a time to have a national response?
Excuse me, it's not COVID, I promise.
Yikes!
I'm trying to understand the question, but are they saying it's
think
gotten
there's-
better?
I think they're saying that there is sometimes where the government takes power
And gives it back?
There's precedent for that.
and gives it back. There's precedent, yeah.
I don't think we can make an argument that the government's power has gotten less since the Spanish flu till now, overall. If there was I would have to study. I would have to study the data.
Yeah.
I don't have the command of the facts to be able to answer that off the top of my head. But just overall, yeah, it's not gotten better.
So you're still skeptical. What you're saying, it sounds like you're still skeptical that in our situation, that power is going back to the people.
Yeah, what I'm saying is maybe you get the ability to choose a mask or not. Again, masking isn't the issue. It's an overarching issue of the government being able to step in. Again, like I was saying the other, whenever, it's not very long before cross symbols or anything else is going to be considered hate speech. It's coming. So when you set precedent by the government being able to seize power by what they deem as important enough, again, you are now falling into the trap of them being able to control when the people are in power are not benevolent.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. What you seen tonight is what happens when Christians disagree. And I hope that you can appreciate that both of these men are risking things for us. Both of them have skin in the game, and coming here and just being part of this conversation, it poses risks for both of them, and both of them have done it for us. And I want to also add that in the preparation of this evening, both of them have behaved just admirably in putting this evening together.